Week's episode of Live Without Training Wheels. I am your host, Lynna Sutherland. I'm the owner and author at Homeschooling Without Training Wheels, and I'm a homeschool mother to 8, ages teen to toddler. And tonight I am thrilled to be joined by Julie Bogart, who is a huge hero of mine. So I'm a little fangirling tonight. I hope you'll bear with me. She is famous for Brave Writer, and most recently has published The Brave Learner. And I will tell you more about her in a moment. And of course, we'll get to chat with her. But before we do that, let me do just a little bit of housekeeping details to help make sure that you know where you are and you're comfortable here in this Crowdcast experience. So first of all, if you are watching us from YouTube or Facebook, you're welcome to continue watching from that location. However, I do want you to know that Julie and I are here in Crowdcast, live streaming to Facebook and YouTube. So if you want to come join the conversation where we can see your comments and answer your questions, look for the link in the video description and then follow us on over here into Crowdcast. If you do leave comments on Facebook, I'll see them afterwards and I'll be happy to respond. But the live conversation is happening here in Crowdcast. If you're in Crowdcast, your best engagement is going to be from a desktop or laptop because, thumb typing. But if you do want to watch us from a mobile device, that's totally fine. Just turn your device into landscape mode and then push the little square button at the top to give you a full screen view and tap view chat and you'll be good to go. A couple of fun things about watching from here in Crowdcast. If you look at the bottom right below our faces, there are a couple of things you'll want to know about. One is the poll. So if you are here and you want to answer that poll, I am just curious because my perspective is that everybody knows Julie. But I'm kind of hoping that I will have the opportunity to introduce Julie to some new friends tonight. So I am very curious to know, how much do you know of Julie? Have you read The Brave Learner? These polls are completely anonymous. It's just kind of fun to get a feel for the audience and who we have listening tonight. And then right next to the poll button, there's a button that says Ask a Question. At any time as we're talking tonight, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, just pop it in that box down there. And the fun thing about the Ask a Question box is that you can upvote questions. So if somebody asks something and you're thinking, oh yes, I'm desperate to know that too, upvote it. And then when we get to the Q&A, we'll start with those questions that seem like they're the most relevant to the most people who are here tonight. Also, if you're watching this on the replay, another cool feature is that I'll be able to timestamp the questions as we address them so that if you're coming in on the replay, you can click a button next to each question to hop right to that answer. You can also kind of skim the content by watching at 2 or 3 times the speed if you're watching on the replay, which is kind of a fun way to skim video content. So, okay. Let's get into the good stuff. Let's start talking to Julie. I'm going to read you a quick bio about Julie, and then I'm going to ask her for some more personal details. Julie Bogart, as I mentioned before, is the popular voice of common sense and compassion for home educators. Her online coaching community, the Homeschool Alliance, her podcast, and her YouTube channel are lifelines for tens of thousands of weary homeschoolers all over the world. Julie's the creator of the award-winning, innovative online writing program called Brave Writer, and the fast-growing weekly habit called Poetry Tea Time. She home educated her 5 children who are now globe-trotting adults. Today, Julie lives in Cincinnati, Ohio, and can be found sipping a cup of tea, planning her next visit to one of her lifelong learning kids. And I'll just throw in as an aside that Julie is one of the first people who I found online who combined 2 things that were really encouraging in my homeschool journey. 1, the kind of long view, been there, done that perspective. And 2, real transparency. I feel like you can find one or the other, but both together was what just really sucked me in and made me say, oh, I need more of this. And then as we mentioned, Julie has recently published The Brave Learner. And so we're going to be talking some about that tonight. So Julie, I gave the kind of official bio, but I would love to hear from you just a little bit about your kids and how you got started with Brave Writer, because I think that's a great story.
Oh, thanks. I'm noticing that I have 2 windows open and it's creating weird, let's see if that works. Oh, that did it. Yay. Okay, I'm here. Thanks, everybody. So good to meet you. Thanks for joining live. So I have 5 kids. And I found out about homeschooling before I was even married. So this was like 1984. And my then fiance had a really good friend who came over to me one day and said, so are you going to homeschool your kids? And of course, I said to him immediately, home what? Like I had never heard of homeschooling. And he went into this, rant about subverting the government and why it would be so important to raise our children in this certain way. And but the part that stood out to me was this idea that we could create a family culture around learning that would establish not only a bond, but a tailor-made education. And interestingly, I actually had a very good public school experience. I grew up in Los Angeles in the 1970s, before Common Core and standards for education. My teachers tended to be ex-hippies who had been in the Peace Corps, and they were very experimental, very hands-on. And for some reason, when this friend, Willie, just me, I suddenly thought, oh, I can do all those really cool things with my own children.
Yeah.
And so I sort of signed on the dotted line. And that really is the genesis of my relationship to homeschooling. At my 5 kids, we did it for 17 years full time. Some of those kids ended up later going to high school, either part or full time. And they've all gone to college except one who quit college 3 times because he's like, Mom, I really don't want a conventional education. And he taught himself to be a computer programmer. I have one child and he lives locally. I have another child who lives in Mexico and is a life coach. I have a son who is a human rights lawyer in Thailand, a 4th child who actually just moved home and he is looking to save some money and then start his career post-college, and then a daughter in San Diego. So that's sort of the picture of my Globetrotters. But you asked about Brave Writer. And Brave Writer began because I was a freelance writer who also homeschooled. And I discovered early on in my conversations with other homeschooling parents that writing was a hard subject for them to teach. And it wasn't that hard for me. I mean, my oldest threw up all the same problems your kids do. My hand hurts. I don't want to write. I can't think of anything to say. Why do we have to write? He had all those reactions. But I seem to have a really deep supply of methods for addressing those problems. And it was that realization when I started sharing those with other homeschoolers that I discovered I had something of value to offer. And so I started very early by writing this one manual, self-published, took it to a convention, and that was January 2000 that the manual came out.
Wow.
And I started a simultaneous online class that was actually just email. It was 20 people on an e-group, and we conducted the whole thing through email. I didn't even have a website yet. This is 2000.
Yeah.
It took me 4 more months before I actually had a website, but that is how I began.
So you're doing online classes before there are online classes.
Oh, way before.
Yeah.
I often tell people, I think I was one of the first ones, and it's partly why my online class method looks so totally different. It was built from a discussion board or email exchange model. I was into a lot of conversation, dissecting the writing, commenting throughout. It wasn't, present video, have a chat going on the side. People turn in assignments. No one else reads them except the teacher. That is not what I had in mind. I was really about the engagement and the transformation of understanding in the parent. That's where it started.
So from very early on, when I became aware of you, it's probably 3 or so years ago now, it was definitely this Brave Writer core and talking a lot about writing. But I feel like you just are not really capable of talking about teaching writing without it sort of blossoming and rippling into what we now call the Brave Writer lifestyle, which doesn't necessarily have to do strictly with writing, but just with kind of the culture that emanates from the way that you teach writing, but approaching all of homeschooling. So that is what has essentially become codified in, the Brave Learner. It's more than just, here's how to teach writing. So how did you go from, a self-published, manual on writing for parents to a traditionally published book?
Oh, what a nice question. I don't get to answer that very often. So what a lot of people might not know about me is that my own mother is a published author. She actually just retired from her career at age 80. She's written 70 published books. So she has a long, rich history of writing. But her books, a lot of them were children's nonfiction. They were daily inspirational readings for seniors. and then other books as well. And I watched many of those go through the traditional publishing cycle. So you write your query letter with your agent, a publisher says yes, you go through you get your advance, you write the book, you go through the process of promoting it, and then 2 years later, it goes into what they call remainders, meaning nobody's going to buy it anymore because they're not going to print it anymore. And so you've made back your advance and maybe a little bit of royalties, and then you've got to start all over again. And of course, that's a perfectly valid way to be a writer. Some of her books had a longer shelf life than that. Her most recent ones definitely have. But I watched that cycle play out so many times. And I realized for myself that what I was more interested in was whether or not I had a message that connected with an audience. I didn't just want to write for its own sake. I'd already done that. I had been published not as a book, but I ran a magazine. I wrote for magazines. I edited PhD dissertations to help people get their PhDs. So I'd worked in the field of writing. It wasn't confidence in my basic skill set. But what I lacked confidence in when I started was, does anyone care about what I have to say? And so I have this sort of running joke actually with the people closest to me, including my mom, which is I built a whole business so I could write a book. Like I am fundamentally a writer, but I wanted to find out if anything I had to say was worth putting in a book that people would purchase and that a publisher would want to publish. So truly what was fun is I started with self-publishing and I grew the business on a timetable that worked with homeschooling, you know?
Yeah.
I was able to grow over time. And if any of you are doing your own thing on the side, whether it's an Etsy shop or a homeschool blogger, keep homeschooling the center because that is your number one task, but it's also going to inform what comes after. And for me, there would be no brave learner if I had turned my life into a machine of conferences and book writing. That was not my goal.
Yeah.
My goal was to somehow keep growing, keep learning, keep educating my kids, keep participating with the Brave Writer community. And it's through all of that that I even had stuff I wanted to share.
Yes,
so,
yes. Well, I was going to say, I mean, this is definitely your voice and your message. But I have to say, as I read it, I feel like there's a little piece of us in this. I mean, these are like conversations that we had that are now in a book, you know, so it's, it's your wisdom, but your wisdom as it came back bounced off of us in, Periscopes and, Facebook Lives and everything. So, so fun.
Can I just pause to say, no one has said that to me. And I will, that's going in my journal. That is so absolutely the truth about this book and about my work. It is a conversation. It's why I say yes, pretty much to all podcast interviews, because even my most recent podcast season, the goal isn't for me to know and you not to know. It's a dialogue. It's a learning journey. And that's how I see homeschooling. So the goal here isn't to be a repository of information and then build yourself up so that you have the defining comment. It's to distill insight. And insight only grows when you are in partnership with conversation partners.
Amen.
In fact, the academic community. So if we just talk about, like, I was an adjunct professor at Xavier University locally. It's a collegial environment. You actually interact with the other professors. They have meetings, they have training periods where you go in and it is pinging off each other's insights. Then you write articles for peer review and they write back and say, well, that doesn't make sense because I did research over here, or, oh, thank you, that informs something I've wondered about. Mm-hmm. It's collegial. Mm-hmm. It's about the shared growth. And then everybody has an opportunity to put it into their own words, to take that insight, how it pings off of you and your experience, and then re-express it again.
Yeah. Julie and I were talking before we went live about how just so many of the things I've read, I say, yes, that totally makes sense. And that fits a lot better with what I actually do as an adult than, like kind of the, traditional homeschooling. It's so funny to think about traditional homeschooling, like almost an oxymoron. But anyway, so, there was no way I was not going to read this book because I already knew the message behind it, the general ideas before it even came out. I looked at my Amazon account. I pre-ordered it last October. I've been waiting forever for this to come out. But I know the hesitation that moms have sometimes about reading another homeschool book because it's like,
Mm,
I'm already drowning. I really don't
yes.
want anyone else's opinion about what I should be doing because then I'll just have more to feel burdened and overwhelmed about. And so this is why when I first wrote an email to my list to talk about, that I was going to share this book, I quoted this line. I invite you to join me on a scavenger hunt for the ordinary magic already at work in your family. So this is really not about like, let me tell you how you're messing up and how you should do it my way because I'm the guru and I have all the answers. No, let me, all these things where we're like, that was an awesome homeschool day, but I have no idea why or how to make it happen again. Right. Or like
That's
that
it.
totally flopped, but I don't know why. I
That's
could tell
right.
that my kid was giving me all the signs of like, no thanks, I'd rather take out the trash than do this, but I don't know why. And I don't know how to make it different and how to make it better. And so, she goes through in the book. I know I'm talking to you, but I'm also talking to those of you who might be listening and interested in the book. She goes through ideas for, how to kind of tap into what makes children catch on with learning, the enchanted learning or the pixie dust, as she talks about. And it's really fun. It's fun and funny. One of the quotes that I loved, which not only did I love the quote, but I loved that I could read it to my children and that they got it, was, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a child in possession of a good instructor must be in want of an education. And they were like, Mr. Bennett.
Do you want to know a funny story about that?
Go for it.
I wrote that, and my copy editor wrote back and edited the sentence. And the copy editors don't typically do that. She came back and she tried to make it like conversational. I wrote back, I said, that's the opening line of Pride and Prejudice. And she was
This is an illusion, right?
Like, she was a little bit like, oh my gosh, how did I miss that? And I thought, oh no, I hope my audience will get it.
I got it.
Of course my audience will get it.
Yes.
But yeah, of course. Part of what I hope to do in this book is to help parents value what they're doing. A lot of what happens in the homeschooling world is what you said. I mean, I lived it, right? They're piling on. Here's more things you can do. Here are things you're not doing right. If you only followed this plan, if you only deepened what you did. And we forget to actually credit ourselves with successes. And so some of what you're going to get when you read the book is just better language that helps you give yourself some credit. So let me give you an example.
Yeah.
And Lena knows this well. So I talk a lot about what I call big, juicy conversations. Basically, that's just a catchphrase to let you know that every time you're having a good, meaningful conversation with your child, it counts.
Yes.
It's actually part of your homeschool day. It's not, oh, well, it happened on the way to the dentist and we were talking about how cavities are formed. And that's because we were going to the dentist. So that's not education.
Yep.
No, it's exactly the other way around. Because you were going to the dentist and the conversation about cavities came up and you had this whole conversation about the teeth and what rots them and what is dental caries and what you can do to fix that and what you should eat and what happens to your mouth when it goes numb with Novocaine. That counts. That's actually a part of your homeschool. Yes. We are not on this weird schedule where it only happens between 8 and 5 and then everything else is mere entertainment or information. It's happening all the time. And so part of what I'm doing in this book is helping you find ways to give yourself credit, to notice what's happening, truly a scavenger hunt. And then when you do hit those roadblocks, to offer you some tools, sort of like a crowbar, to open up that can that's stuck, the lid that won't come off, that will get those juices going again so that learning will feel natural.
Yep.
Not like something you're doing to your kids.
Yep,
It'll be something you're sharing in together.
Exactly. Yeah. We went through several years of, I had some, struggles with postpartum depression. And so we went through some tough times in our homeschool. And there were days where homeschooling was basically like a read aloud. And then, some people were coloring and doing whatever. And some people were sort of paying attention. And then we would sort of rabbit trail off onto these conversations. And then I'd get to the end of the day and I just kind of feel like we didn't really do what we were supposed to do because we didn't check all the boxes. And I watched, I think it was the DVD series that you have about recordings from a conference. And you talked about a language rich environment and how such a huge chunk of that, like you actually had this pie chart and a huge chunk of that was just conversation. And, I just wanted to cry. It was like, oh my gosh, she said that what I'm doing is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I thought I was really
Right.
like flunking it here. But anyway, just helped me to appreciate what was already happening. So there were things on just about every other page that I thought, oh, I want to talk to Julie about this. Oh, I want to ask her about that. But I had to somehow narrow it down because we don't have 3 hours. I wish we did. So I just pulled out a couple of things that I thought, oh, my listeners would love to hear about that. One of the things that really struck me was when you talked about the forces of enchantment. And one of the things you mentioned was risk. And, we hear a lot in our online world, or as we read articles or whatever, about like how stressful traditional education can be these days. And, so I always kind of thought of like, oh, I'm so glad that I'm giving my children this environment where they're free to explore things and they don't have to wake up in the morning and say, I have a stomach ache because I have 3 tests and I don't know, if my clothes are going to be made fun of or whatever, like just all those stresses that I'm glad to remove from them. But it was an eye-opening moment to think about how motivating risk can be in the right way, and how, for my children, homeschooling is really not that risky. Like it's kind of risky for me as a mom to do the homeschooling. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how to balance that, like not stress where we're having, mental health issues because we're so overburdened, but yet that risk that can be motivating in a healthy way.
For the kids or for the moms?
For the kids. Yeah. How do we help our kids to have motivating risk, but not, debilitating stress?
So to me, risk is inherent in growing up. Most children are naturally experimenting and exploring the immediate universe in front of them with their bodies, with their minds. I watched this adorable video the other day of a dad who is a hockey coach, and his 4-year-old was in skates and he had mic'd
I saw
him up.
that. It was hilarious.
Did you see that? Oh, adorable. So basically this little kid is skating and he's falling down repeatedly on the ice. And ice, by the way, is very cold, very hard. I skated when I was young. My brother played hockey. So I found this to be very familiar territory. And this poor little boy is like 1, 2, 1, 2, skating along. And then he would just face plant. And then he would say to himself, it's okay. I'm okay. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's what risk is. Risk is that willingness to keep face planting on the ice and then to be able to say to yourself, it's okay. I am okay. And of course, when you're 4 years old, it's adorable. Risk looks different as kids get older. They suddenly want to go to sleepaway camp, or they say that they really want to hang out in this one group of kids. And there's like 3 kids you don't know that well. And you're kind of wondering, is it okay? I remember when my daughter was like in 6th grade, and we have this theme park that is here in Cincinnati called Kings Island. And she wanted an annual pass, and her older brother had one too. And she wanted to be able to just go with him and hang out with this big group of kids that were from her junior high youth group. And, I was nervous. This is before cell phones. Like, how am I going to know she's okay? That's risk.
Yeah.
It's being willing for your child to grow, to develop, to be out from under your supervision long enough to test their own resilience so that they can say, it's okay, I'm okay, and find a resource within to be able to move forward. Now, of course, there are some risks not worth taking. I don't want my kids testing drugs, for example. So I'm not saying all risk is inherently good, but in the absence of meaningful risk that feels good to the child, that's when they're enticed to dangerous risk. Because now they are storing up so much of that sort of hormonal urge that is part of their biology that they are going to find a way to have a risk. So when you clamp down too much, they don't have the meaningful risks. But there are so many available for every single age, whether it's performing on a sports team or performing on a stage with an acting company. These are all ways to use your bodies, your minds, your hearts out from under the constant supervision of your parents to grow. And that's what risk is about. It's about growth.
So we're not even talking about it necessarily has to come in your history lesson or in your schooling, but just having those life opportunities for taking risks and growing and being allowed to grow.
Well, so they're parallel, actually. So let me give you an example of risk in a math lesson.
Okay.
Most of the ways that we teach math are very prescriptive. We say, here is the page, here is the process to solve the problems on the page, and I will measure how many you get right. You're going to use this pencil. You're going to sit in this chair at this table. There is almost no risk. In fact, the only thing they're risking is your displeasure. And that is not the kind of risk any child is interested in taking.
Because what's the payoff?
There isn't one.
Right.
That's absolutely right. All you're risking is unhappiness. There's no benefit to you. So some kids who are compliant will sit down and with confidence attack the page. And if they're successful, they'll get the reward of your pleasure, which might motivate them then to just keep doing it every day and fulfilling it. But for kids who either don't like sitting in a chair or are not successful and don't get your pleasure, well, now they're risk avoidant. Why would they even sit down? Why would they even do math? But what if we approached it completely differently? What if we handed a child a math book at the start of the year, or we say, what lesson do you want to learn? And it's totally not the right one. It's not in the right order, but it's just something on the page. They're flipping through. It looked interesting. They saw a pie graph, they saw a lot of numbers, big, put together. Could we start there because it was interesting? Mm-hmm. Even if we don't know how to solve it, could we start there? Could we say, hey, take a stab at that? How might we solve that? What do you think is happening on this page? What if we investigated it and took the risk of wondering, of imagining a solution? I'll take it one step further. So I have a son, Noah, who took a math class at the local public school, and he was getting a C+, which made me feel like the biggest loser ever as a homeschool mother. He's at public school, very first class, and he's not getting an A. I mean, I just look like a terrible mom. So one day I go in to meet the teacher, with my tail between my legs. I didn't even wear makeup. I was so ashamed. And I arrived and she was really friendly, shockingly so. And we sat down and she says, oh, Julie, I just love Noah. And I said, you do? He's getting a C+, and I homeschooled him. I'm the worst parent ever. She goes, oh, he's getting a C+ because he doesn't turn in his homework. I said, well, shouldn't he be? She goes, I guess, but I mean, he's homeschooled. It really doesn't matter. It just doesn't make it from his locker to this room. It's no big deal. I said, but he needs an A. And she's like, Julie, Noah is the most mathematical student in my class. And I said, he is? She said, this is what happens. I write a problem on the board, and then I say to the class, how will we solve this problem? And every student picks up a pencil and poises it over paper, waiting for me to tell them. And Noah will always raise his hand and offer a solution I haven't considered. She said, now that is mathematical. That is a kid who is interested in math. Math risk looks like, I don't know how to solve this, but hey, I'll take a stab at it. And let's find out together how much of that worked, how much of it didn't. Not, did I get it right? So yes, when we're talking about academic risk, it's the willingness to ask new questions, to imagine possibilities, to think outside your familiar set of beliefs and perspectives, to be open to reading or exploring or knowing what you didn't know before. History is interesting to young children because of narrative. By junior high, it's interesting because of conflicts, wars, all the things that create history. And then by high school and college, by theme, things like racism, things like the civil liberties that we enjoy. We suddenly have this other level of interest, and it's very risky when you start reading outside your familiar perspective. So that's what risk looks like in an academic context, but they support each other, right? Yeah. Whether it's that physical risk or intellectual one. I've noticed with families that when you're very controlling of behavior, you tend to have a hard time with intellectual risk too. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of freeing yourself up to recognize that risk is part of growth in every way.
Like being able to enjoy, memes with your middle schoolers or high schoolers, and they get the cultural context and they get why it's funny. And
exactly. Yeah. Being able to make a lame joke or to be judgmental. I remember my daughter, Johanna, who teaches our online book clubs for junior high students. She said to me one time, we were looking at this one book she was teaching. It's not a great book. It was like How to Train a Dragon or something, so there's not a lot of depth in the book. And I was like, how are you going to do 3 weeks of discussion about this book? And she says, oh, don't worry. I'm going to invite them to criticize the book because they love feeling superior to an adult who wrote a book. So superiority is highly undervalued in our homeschools. Teenagers love to feel superior to an argument, to a thought process. That is their minds taking a risk.
Love it.
Trying to think differently.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. Okay, so another kind of one of those, like, I'm getting a sense of balance here is you were talking about how we often, because we're kind of driven by this, like, we need to check the box and we need to finish the curriculum and we need to whatever, that we move past things so quickly that we don't give our children a chance to enjoy mastery. That phrase was like, whoa, yeah, okay, I got to think about that. But, to do things that that come easily for them so that they can enjoy that accomplishment. But then on the other hand, you talked about how it's important for them to be challenged. And so I'm visualizing, days in our homeschool where I'm kind of wondering to myself, is this the resistance of I'm afraid to fail? Or is this the resistance of I'm so bored, I need a new challenge? Do you have any thoughts for us about how we can, when you get that feel,
see the difference,
feels digging in, is this like, I need something easier or I need something harder?
Well, one way to start is always to ask. I think there is not enough conversation about the learning process with our kids. It's like we're all trying to do it silently and invisibly and mind reading. So you can actually say, is this page boring you or is it too hard? Like that would be my first question for something like that. But not only that, they don't always know, by the way. Sometimes they'll tell you they're bored when it's too hard. Sometimes they'll say it's too hard when they're bored. So I'm not saying that they always have keen insight into their own emotional regulation. But you can always start there. And then if you treat the experience like it's malleable, not like it's rigid, but like, well, let's try. Let's find out if it's too hard. I'll sit with you and we'll do a couple problems and see. So now you've provided some support. Or if they say it's boring, say, well, let's see. I wonder what we could do to this to make it a little more interesting. Help me brainstorm. And you start trying those ideas. Now, the idea of mastery, the reason I brought that up is that I think we do overlook that. We understand that children need challenges, but we don't understand that they need ease. Somehow, homeschooling parents have decided, probably educators in general, that if something is easy, they must be beyond it. But if the goal is mastery for the sake of use, well, most people are happiest doing things that they're naturally good at. It's much more fun for me to type now that I've been doing it for 50 years or 40 years than it was for me when I was in my typing class at school, trying to painstakingly keep my fingers on the right keys. Right. And so there's a certain utility, like if you're teaching your child something and then they're never going to use it again, what was even the point? So part of my thinking is if they've learned it, mastery then is about implementation. Like what benefit is this to a child? If they've learned fractions, then it would be a great idea to do a recipe in the kitchen that is halved or doubled or 2/3 larger and actually go through the mental gymnastics of applying what they learned. If you've ever met somebody who is a contractor, like a guy who actually redoes your kitchen, remodels your kitchen, the calculations they can do with a yardstick is staggering. They are like mental calculators, but they're using like traditional standard fractions. They're not even on the decimal system. It's because of that use. They've done it so many times. It's like just oozes out of them. It's natural. We don't give our children enough opportunities for repetition to have the joy of that mastery, that feeling of, oh, I can just rip this out. I know exactly what I'm doing. I can even show it off a little bit. But it has to be useful.
I bet you $200. None of those contractors said in 6th grade, someday I want to be a contractor, so I need to get fluent in my head in multiplying and dividing fractions. It came the other way around.
Exactly. And that's, I think, part of what's missing in most of our homeschools. I was reading before I came on that was really adorable. This one mom goes through this amazing day with her daughter. This is on some Facebook group. All these amazing things her daughter did. And she's annotating it the whole way because in her own mind, she's like, but why won't you do the math page? Oh, okay, we'll play with dolls. Oh, but why won't you do the math page? All right, we'll have this pun war, but why won't you do the math page? And then at the end of her little diatribe, she says, something like, I guess Julie's right. We want them to do the math page for us, not really for them. And that's the question, right? You want to invest in a way that your child knows that they're getting an education, not that you know they're getting an education. Yeah. And there is a slight difference.
Okay, there. So that's actually the perfect segue to the last thing I wanted to ask you about, which is, I know a word that you don't like, but that we've talked about a lot around my blog and various places, and that is chores. And here's the thing that really jumped out at me about that. You can read in 101 places about age appropriate chores and how to make a chore chart and blah, 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 blah. But what was even more fascinating to me is I was reading what you were writing about the chores. I thought, oh my, I never really stopped to consider how many threads of differing and sometimes conflicting motives are going into our decisions about what we're doing during chore time. And, I have a earlier segment that I did about what I called bundling and unbundling in learning. So sometimes, hey, you can kill a whole bunch of birds with one stone if you just write a paragraph about history and then it's spelling and it's history and it's blah, blah, blah. But sometimes when you're hitting a roadblock, you need to unbundle. You need to, like pull apart, parse the pieces so that you can say, okay, what's the main goal here? Like if the main goal is history, ditch the writing thing and just talk about whatever you read in history, right? And so I thought, mind blown. That's what we need to do when we run up against a roadblock with the chore thing. So Julie, tell us a little bit about what are all those kind of I shoulds that are flowing into chores that make it this really complicated thing.
I think bottom line, the word chore already sets us up for conflict because there's almost no good associations with that word. It's labor, it's assignments, it's obedience, it's a chart that I have to cooperate with. There's almost nothing associated with that word that has any meaning or pleasure. And usually when we're assigning chores, we're saying that we're teaching our kids responsibility. But what we're really teaching them is to cooperate with the adult agenda. And once they're on their own, we find out whether they valued any of that or not. I share in the book that I grew up with a family that actually had a housekeeper and a yard lawn service, and I never did any chores and I never did any lawn. And as an adult, I'm perfectly capable of all those things. So it's not like those skills are hard.
Yeah.
They are literally the skills that we give to the lowest paid people in our society. They are entry-level jobs. They're completely within the skill set of all full-grown adults. So if we start there, we can stop the character evisceration of children for not caring the same way we do. We can recognize that these are not difficult. They could learn them at any time.
Yeah, my mom said to me one time when I was having one of those like, and I don't understand why they just don't care. And she looked at me and she said, that's right. They don't care about this like you do. I was like, okay, that's freeing.
Well, exactly. And part of what we're looking at then is the parents who have all the power, who choose what house or yurt or apartment to live in with its care conditions. Somebody has cedar wood floors and somebody else has linoleum. And we're imposing the standard of living that makes sense to us on children who have yet to form a relationship with the physical universe. I remember I had a dog growing up named Holly who threw up a lot. She had a very sensitive stomach. She was a Boston Terrier. And my mother would just be so upset every time Holly threw up on the carpet because, it's a lot of cleaning and it damages the carpet. And I remember thinking, but it's not that big a deal. I mean, we should clean it up, of course, but the carpet looks fine. Like I didn't have any financial investment in this carpet. Our cat was clawing the couches. My mom hated that. I didn't think it looked that different than when it was unclogged. Now, as an adult, I totally would. But I was like 10, 11, 12. I could not see what she saw. So part of what I want parents to recognize is when they say, well, you have to learn how to care for this, or we have this big backyard and you have to help us care for it. There are children growing up in condo units who don't have to care for their yards. So you made that decision. The responsibility is on you to see to it that the property and the home that you chose is well cared for. Do we want our children's participation? Definitely. But it has to be scaled in some meaningful way to what they can contribute, not what you require in order to feel peaceful. A lot of times parents act as though the children owe the maid service to the
Mm-hmm,
family.
mm-hmm.
Like the parents aren't going to do it. It should be the children. So in our family, it was a varying potpourri of attempts. I do not want to project in any way that we solved it. In fact, I think it's on the last page of the book where I say we never did get a once for all chore system in place or housekeeping system in place. But what I became more comfortable with over time was recognizing that there were a variety of standards, that everybody's mattered, that I didn't always get the final say, that when things became a lot of pressure and people were not happy, it was time to reevaluate. And that if my standards really mattered to me and no one else, I could ask for help rather than assigning a chore. And for me, that was the key mind change for me, was recognizing I had to own my standard, not impose it.
And it's okay to say, like, it just drives me really crazy when the floor hasn't been swept under the table. Not that that's some kind of like ultimate moral standard, but just like, mommy, like, would be so much happier if we could sweep. And would you, participate with me in helping mommy be sane and nice?
Well, completely. And then you can do that for them. And that's, I think, sometimes what's missing. Like, I remember one time really starting to get frustrated that at the computer, there were always these empty pretzel bags and about 20 glasses because my boys just kept taking turns and they'd eat and it would all be there. And then one day I realized they're really into their game. The nicest thing I could do would be to clear out all that stuff for them, not require it of them. So I just started doing that sort of on rotation because it was easy for me. I just would walk by, I'd grab it. And so then one day when I actually, I'd asked for help for a little while and people mostly said no. And then one day when I asked for help, my gaming son said, "Hey, Mom, I'll help you. I just got to finish beating this level and then I'll be right there." And he did. He came over. 3 months later, as I'm washing dishes and getting ready for bed, he says, "Mom, go to bed. I stay up later than you. I will clean the dishes after I'm done playing the game." It's partly caught. It's not just enforced. And I think we have to have some patience about that. It's not going to happen tomorrow because you asked once. You actually have to shift your mindset around it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and when you live in a house with other people, your mess is 1/5 or 1/8 or whatever of the stuff. But when you walk past your own mess, you're kind of like, oh, right, I put that there because I'm going to do it later and I'll get to that. And it does drive you crazy, but somehow when we see other people's mess, it's kind of like, this is an offense against my domain. And and we get irritated. I mean, I can remember having this even just when it was just my husband and I, and he'd be at work or whatever. And I would kind of get all blown out of proportion about like his socks on the floor and the blah, 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 blah. And there was 50% my stuff that just didn't rub me the wrong way because it's my stuff.
What a great point. I think that was actually one of the things that I remember my kids bringing up. My kid's dad had his office, desk in our bedroom, and it was always just stacked with papers, and then there were files underneath, and there was just sort of like this ooze.
That's me. Yeah, right? That's my room.
And then he would tell the kids, "You have to clean up your bedrooms." And they would come back and walk into our room and see the mess and be like, "But I don't get why this is okay." And he had some elaborate justification. And one day I just sat him down and I said, "This is absolutely not okay with me. Like, they get to have their rooms be messy if that's what you get to have yours be. You aren't even setting an example." And so we came to some agreements about community space versus private space. And I think that's one way to approach this. It's difficult to come in and want to sit and watch TV if you've left all your school books, your shoes, your blanket that you were sitting with in the space where someone else wants to sit. And now you expect them to clean that up. So we had conversations like that, and you could call someone on those kinds of behaviors. But that's very different than, the chore chart.
Right.
It's about meeting needs.
Yeah. And we can release ourselves from this fear of like, if I don't have them clean the bathroom every week, then they're going to grow up and not know how to clean a bathroom when they move out or something.
Right.
Yeah.
That
is great. Okay. Well, we have one question already. I'm going to get to that in just a moment. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop up a little green button right down here at the bottom. And this is a link to the site that's specifically designed for the brave learner. So if you are interested in this book, which, oh my goodness, you should be interested in this book, click that link and you can head over to her site, find out more about it. Get yourself a copy.
I'm going to
Yeah.
And there's also this 92-page free guide at that site that you can download and print, and then you can work through the activities.
Definitely.
Like a good girl.
That's right. Because we all need to check the boxes.
We called it a companion guide just so we wouldn't call it a workbook, but it's kind of like a workbook. More like a bullet journal.
For mommies. Okay. So hop over and take a look at that. And if you're watching on Facebook, I hope I put a link there, but if I haven't put a link, then I'll hop over to the Facebook Live and just drop that in there at the end of the comments there. And then I'm going to start with this question. If you've got questions, feel free to drop it in. If you're watching from Facebook or YouTube, you're going to need to hop into Crowdcast to leave us a question. And then if you are interested in watching future broadcasts that I have, just hover over my name at the top where it says Lynna at Live Without Training Wheels and click follow. And I've got all my March shows scheduled, so you can take a look at those and register for those as well. So our first question is from Amy. And Amy says, can you discuss the commonly suggested idea by many for daily writing prompts compared to free writing and the brave writer lifestyle of putting energies into 1 to 2 projects a month?
Yes. So there is, I think, a modern myth in the writing world that writers write every day. There are morning pages, people who have this discipline of writing every day. Usually the people who are saying that are professional writers. I happen to know professional writers, have worked with professional writers. My mother is a professional writer. I'm just here to tell you they don't write every day, at least not the kind of writing we're asking children to do. Some days they're doing research. Some days they're revising. Some days they are literally taking a walk on the beach because they are out of ideas and they know they need to wool gather and think again before they go back to writing. So yes, they might have a morning page practice similar to a journal, but they are not being asked to write about Pocahontas after having just read one paragraph about Pocahontas, right? Yeah. So this notion of generating writing from scratch on a daily basis is erroneous, and it's not valuable to any creative act. What we would prefer, and what I like to say, is interact with writing every day. Engage with writing every day. Some days you're reading it. Some days you're editing it. Some days you're revising it. Some days you're free writing. Some days you're writing in a journal. Some days you are simply taking a break and talking is the only version of writing that is a part of your life. Interact with writing on a regular basis, daily, and you will grow as a writer. Mix up all those practices. So writing prompts are fantastic for that sort of free writing experience. Sorry, I have all these pop-ups. For that, they're wonderful for free writing. So you might have a prompt that says something like, pretend that it is your birthday today and someone throws you a surprise party. What would you hope would be in that party? Perfect. Go ahead and free write about that. But I wouldn't necessarily say that you should present your child with a prompt every day unless that child's asking for it. Now, I would have been the kid who would have loved to do that every day until I got sick of it. But I did a lot of writing. I was a natural writer. But for kids who struggle, that is like a sentence in jail. How does that square with writing projects? A writing project is different than daily writing or free writing. A writing project says there is an outcome that will have been revised and edited. It will be something I can hold in my hands. It will be something that accomplishes a specific goal. Free writing and daily writing are just about stirring up the ability to hook up a hand with what's going through your brain. There's no editing or revising going on. You're just ticker tape running through your brain and you're taking notes. You're just transcribing your thoughts. When we get to a project, we're a little bit more intentional. We say, okay, here's the thing we're researching. So we're going to read, watch movies, have a conversation, Google online. And once we've got all that, then we're going to set up, 2, 3, 5, 8 free writing times where we address various aspects of this topic. And then we're going to take that material and start shaping it into a writing form, whether that's a lap book or a research paper. It's all the same process, or a novel. And then finally, we take it through an edit where after we've revised it a few times and we've shaped it up, now we edit it for typos and spelling errors, and then we're done. So I like that process to take at least a month. Too often, writing programs for kids Act like you can do that entire process in a day or a week. And that does not give enough time to sort of sit with your own writing and insight generator to create something actually memorable and worth reading. So a week to research, a week to free writing lots of times, a week to revising into a shape, and a week for editing and reading it to an interested audience.
Yeah.
The most important part, by the way. Read it to someone. Please do not put it in the homeschool folder that goes in the mausoleum of your basement. Okay.
Yeah. When we started doing free writing, one of the things my kids loved about it was the part where, they read it to me before I've ever laid eyes on it. So I'm just getting it as they see it, not like, oh, the spelling mistakes or the no periods or whatever. And they really latched onto that. And so even now when they write things and I'll say, oh, let me see, they'll be like, no, I'm going to read it to you because they know that it just, I can experience it just as they wanted me to experience it when they read it out loud to me.
Peter Elbow, who is really one of the chief writing gurus of academia from the last century, he's in his 80s now, but during, the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, he was king all over the United States. Anyway, his final book was called Vernacular Eloquence, and he has a whole chapter on how critical it is for people to read their own writing out loud in front of someone. That is one of the ways we grow as writers. So when I say interacting with writing every day, that would be another valid way. I cannot tell you how many times I've read my own manuscript. Dozens and dozens. Like I know whole sections by heart because I know how to improve my writing only by hearing it.
Yes,
out
that's
loud.
exactly what I do. I read my blog posts out loud to myself over and over again before I ever publish them.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah, and so many kids don't even know that is a valid strategy for growing as a writer. They don't. They're like at arm's length. They write it and then they just want it away from themselves instead of sort of reveling in their own insight, in their own vocabulary.
Love that.
Right? Which is what it should be.
Love that. Okay. Let's see. Next question. So if a child is a struggling writer, does the daily writing prompt or free write is that something that would help them?
I would do it once a week. I would not do it daily. So build up to a week, once a week. We in Brave Writer suggest Friday free writing because obviously alliteration, but it works on any day. So just pick one. And I expect you to free write with your kids. So you are not off the hook here. This is not you doing writing education to your children. This is a shared community experience of writers. And this is how writers grow. They spend time in support groups writing together, reading their writing to each other, giving encouragement and feedback, real reader feedback. I understood this part. This part was less clear to me. You really got me going. I was so on the hook at the end of that chapter, or I don't even know what that word means. It's so amazing. Tell me more about that. Like that. So free writing together, parent and children, creates a culture where writing is normalized. Imagine if you were trying to teach your children to speak by not talking. They do all the talking and you just observe and you say, this is our special talking moment of the day. They're not going to grow. Yeah. And writing can grow the same way as speech, but it's a communication. It's a dialogue. It's a participation together.
Love that.
Once a week is perfect.
All right, one more. Julie, I'm wondering what you think of doing a continent of learning with the 12 superpowers as the bubbles/countries rather than academic and other topics as the bubble headings with the goal of seeing how we can expand the main interest or topic in the areas of adventure, risk, etc.
Fabulous. In fact, one of the things that, really isn't in the book, but has become part of the conversations I'm having around it is that initially, when I drew the continent of learning, it really was to help people use interests like Fortnite or Minecraft and actually see that you can find adjacent academics, magic doors that open. It's like they're going in and out of these spaces. And then you can start to build your own imagination, seeding your imagination so that you can have those conversations, naturally bring in those connections. It doesn't mean you stop the skill work. It means now you understand how the skill work is connected. But then I flipped the script for my Homeschool Alliance community and I said, you can put the subject like fractions, or times tables or grammar in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
and see how their interests intersect rather than other school subjects. So obviously putting risk or enchantment in the middle, surprise, mystery, risk, or adventure in the middle, and building out from there is obviously another amazing way to use it. And I look forward to people coming up with ideas I haven't even thought of. One mom suggested to me that she had a 12-year-old or something, and she asked him to do it for himself. And he found that to be a huge
Oh,
adventure,
love
like
it.
to show her all the ways Fortnite shows up in all the subject areas. She didn't have to do the thinking. She let him do it, let him start to prove it to her. So, the right kind of kid would really find that fun. It should not be an assignment, by the way. It should be a joyful experience for the child.
Yes. I had, my oldest, who is moderately dyslexic, doesn't do a lot of, reading for fun, but is an amazing, impromptu narrator. Got really, really hooked on Mega Man at one point, and just, all things Mega Man. And, I know different families have different opinions about video games, but we were happy to let him do that some. But then there were other times where we said, okay, it's time to, put that away. And so when he wasn't playing Mega Man, what he would often do is pull up this gallery on the computer of all the characters ever and draw them. And he's now, I'm his mom, so I'm biased, but a fairly accomplished self-instructed artist from beginning by
Wow.
just drawing Mega Man. And then, of course, he wanted it to become cartoons. And so he's asking his sister how to spell things so his, storyline can be legible by other people. And he has like all the Mega Man soundtracks, and he's written little, they're all just, musical, but he's written little ditties to go along with them. I remember one time he wrote a song about cleaning up that all the kids would sing to the soundtrack of the Mega Man, tunes while they were cleaning the schoolroom.
Amazing.
So, it's such a blessing to see this kind of thing unfold. But I feel like for us, the only reason that kind of thing ever came about was because of those hard years where my own instinct to want to just like super schedule everything it just wasn't happening. Not because I chose for it not to happen, but I just couldn't. And it was kind of this awesome opportunity to sort of see what happens when you don't. And I never went back.
Yes. Oh, I love hearing that. I think that happens to a lot of us. There is a moment where you recognize that control is not the number one priority in a family. And when you get there, it changes how you see everyone. It changes how you expect your life to feel. I remember reading these homeschool books where parents would give this really beautiful vision of unschooling, for example, the most radical version of how we do schooling. And I would think, excuse me, I would think, well, my kids will never do anything like that because they were 7,
right?
Because they were
Right.
10, because I couldn't see the story of who they were going to become. My son, Jacob, who is a human rights lawyer in Thailand today, when he was 6, wanted to be a professional baseball player. When he was 8, he wanted to be an astronaut. When he was 12, he wanted to be a bartender. When he was 15, you know what I'm saying? Like, you cannot know where they'll end up. And you also can't know what they're capable of if they haven't done the thing yet. So sometimes we short circuit the potential for greatness because we're devaluing the very earliest version. So your son with Mega Man, just wanting to trace them or first just kind of draw these sketches, you're not thinking, oh, well, that will lead him to be, Van Gogh someday. You're thinking, well, when is he going to learn fractions? Drawing isn't worth anything. Not recognizing that path will actually unfold, and this will be a meaningful part of it, or it won't. He'll move on to the thing that is.
Yes. But, so in the book, there's a section where Julie talks about you can learn anything through anything. And really, because seriously, what he was learning, even besides, oh, look, he learned how to draw and he learned how to spell things to write cartoons or whatever, what he was learning was I can figure something out by myself. And I don't really even care what else came out of that, but just that feeling of like, if I want to do something, I can figure out how. Awesome. Totally worth it.
In fact, yes. In fact, when we say that we want our kids to love learning, and we all do, sometimes what we forget is that learning to love is part of this process, correct? So when we see them start to love something, that is going to lead to learning. That is what that is. So try not to despise it just because it's, making purses with duct tape, right? There is a process going on there that is something that we can value. I mean, I remember my daughter, Katrin, got very much into K-pop, which led to these Korean films, which led to being interested in horror. And I know not everyone values horror. I absolutely hate horror. But there was something about that experience. It had to do with costuming and makeup and story arcs and who the actors were. And it was related to her love of Korean culture. And I had to just like pause and actually see all these interconnections rather than just having that knee-jerk reaction. Oh, I don't like that thing. It can't possibly have any value for her. So I think that's one of the things, you getting curious yourself about why something attracts your child would be a good first step for the parent. Just get curious instead of judgmental.
Yep. Okay, well, we have a couple other questions, but we're going to have to stop there. So I'm just going to go ahead and wrap up for tonight. But I will go back and comment underneath these questions, just text comment. But thank you, Julie, so much for being here with us tonight. This has been so fun. I'm really thrilled that you took the opportunity to come on. Again, click that green button, check out more about the Brave Learner. And of course, you can follow Julie at Brave Writer on Facebook and Instagram at Julie Brave Writer to find out more about Brave Writer and the Brave Learner. So thank you all for joining me.
Thank you, Lynna.
And thanks for being here, audience. See y'all next week.